Just before we start the presentation and the workshop, we were going to go through the questions that we received yesterday after my first presentation. We had about 10 people ask some questions, and I hope we'll try to keep this reasonably short, so if I don't cover all the content that whoever asked the question wanted to understand, please feel free to find me and we can have a longer chat. So the first question we had was, what was the problem that Moodle HQ is trying to solve with the adoption of Open Badges 3.0? So one of the things that we are doing with the Open Badges is we started looking at the new standard as it was being ratified. One of the things we realized with that work was the existing Open Badges implementation in Moodle needed a lot of refactoring. It was designed around Open Badges 1, and for it to support multiple versions of Open Badges, we'd have to refactor it and do quite a bit of work. There are also some problems with the existing Open Badges implementation. So we were taking the opportunity to implementing Open Badges 3 to refactor the existing work and to actually make it work better than it currently does. Improve some of the workflows, do some of the other work as well. The other problem we were trying to solve with that, so largely a tech debt issue. The other problem we're trying to solve with that is there is a lot of regions and national initiatives in Australia, in Europe, in particular countries in Europe, who are trying to build their own backpacks for micro-credentials or actual credentials. So part of that is most of them are looking at Open Badges 3. There's a large portion of the Open Badges 3 standard that is built on top of the Comprehensive Learner Record. And the Comprehensive Learner Record is also being adopted into a HR standard. So for people applying for jobs, the Open HR standards also adopted the Comprehensive Learner Record as part of that standard. So when you apply for a job in some places in the world, if you have those records as part of your badging history, it can automatically be uploaded to your prospective employer. So that's the problems we're trying to solve with that. It's future looking, it's not stuff that we're going to solve today because there are very few implementations of Open Badges, but that is one of the things that we're working on. The other question around Open Badges that came in was, when will it be available? We're aiming to have it for 5.0 or 5.1. We're not entirely sure which version yet because there's a couple other large pieces of work we need to do. So we're working on Bootstrap 5, which is going to be a long piece of work. We have a few other similar ones. So it'll be either 5.0 or 5.1 as our current aim. We may run into some technical issues. We may find it's a bigger piece of work than we expect, but that's the current timeline we're working towards. The next question we had was, what's new in reports? What new reports can be created with Report Builder? We're interested in the automatic reports take into account the end of the course feedback given to teachers and students to be combined with other KPIs and learning analytics. So 4.5, most of the improvements were to existing filters within reports. So we added, there was about 18 improvements all up. Included things like adding the author for content, filter times by minutes. So previously you could only filter by dates, and you can now filter by minutes. Returning custom tags, fixing localization issues. So one of the problems, there was some of the number formats because different countries use decimal points and commas differently, where it wasn't always reading those number formats correctly. So we were doing some work around that to make sure that was localized correctly. Cohort filters have been added to the course reports. And we also added a new competency report. So we've only added one new report, but that's again something that we'll continue to build on time. We wanted to consolidate what we had and make sure it was really good for everyone to be able to use, and then we'll start adding new reports rather than trying to add too many new reports and then having a big job to go back and fix a lot of things. We had a question come in asking whether it was possible to use Office 365 and Copilot with the new AI subsystem. Not yet. So we don't have a connector for the Office 365 Copilot. Potentially it is something we need to do. We haven't looked at the APIs to see if that's technically possible, but that's one that we will definitely, I'm sure there'll be demand for it because it'll be one of those systems that's going to be in use by a lot of universities. But I'll check with Matt, who's the product manager for that, to see whether he's actually looked at that in any detail. The next question was around upgrading to 4.5. Will it be possible to transform sections into subsections, or do you have to create a subsection and move the previous activities. At the moment, it's only possible to create a subsection and drag and drop the activities into it. You can't just go to a section and say, hey, become a subsection. The reason for that essentially is because it needs to be within an existing section. So if you've got a section, you then need to move that section into another section. We know people are going to ask for this. They want to be able to drag an entire section inside another section. They want to be able to drag a subsection out and create a section. It's something that we're aware of. It's not in the initial implementation, but it's something we definitely will look at, see how much demand there is for it. The next question was, summarize actions for the AI function. Does it work only with text or also with multimedia content? My understanding, it only works with text at this point. The framework's extendables, so potentially it's something that we could look at being able to feed video content and other pieces of content out to a large language model. One of the complications we have there is that content doesn't always exist within Moodle. It's not a file in Moodle a lot of the time. It's a link out to YouTube, or it's a link out to Panopto or some other tool. So we'd have to look at the challenges around that to see how feasible that would be. But again, it's something that would definitely be valuable to a lot of institutions where they've got video learning materials that they want to include in their models, including the context data for their models. And the last one was, last year we announced the rework of the web services APIs, and how's it going? So it's going to be a long and slow process. One of the things that we did in Moodle 4.5 was really lay the groundwork for that. So they've added the Swagger UI. So for anyone who's familiar with Open API standards, that's now been incorporated into Moodle 4.5. They've done a bunch of library upgrades to help support this. So Guzzle was one of those. And they've also implemented the new routing system for the new APIs to make it easier to create new APIs. It's going to be a long, slow process. So we're not going to tomorrow announce a V2 and all the old APIs won't work. We'll start working on one area at a time, introducing new APIs. The old APIs will exist for probably several versions. Likely we start making breaking changes at the next major version, so it won't be before the new LTS. So you're likely to have both versions of an API exist for 2 to 3 versions. And then, so for example, if we put in version 5, we introduce a new files API, both will exist until at least version 6. So you'll have the LTS and plenty of time to adapt and change. We know we want to get this right, and it's going to take time to get it right. So we know that that's something that we need to get feedback on. We need to make sure that our implementation is correct. And obviously, everyone here needs time to adapt to use the new APIs, because there's lots of historic systems that are built on top of those things. So they were the questions we had from yesterday. Hopefully that answered all of those. If anyone else has more questions about my presentation yesterday or the roadmap or anything that we're thinking about, I'd really love to hear more from you. And I'm around all day today, so please feel free to come and have a conversation with me. I hope the automatic translation is working reasonably well as well. So I'm glad it's working today for everyone. So just conscious of time, I would like to jump onto the main presentation. So it's less of a presentation today, and it's more of I want to get feedback from the community here. I want to hear what your thoughts on AI are and some of the issues around it. And I want there to be some discussion. So as Paula said at the beginning, if you don't feel comfortable speaking English, please speak in Italian. The session's being recorded, and I can get that translated later so I can make sure that I understand all the context of what's being said. We'll also be using WooClap through the presentation, so we'll have the slide to join that in a minute. I just wanted to very briefly have a little bit of an indulgence on my side. Just say I've been interested in AI for a long, long time, since I was in university in the 90s. These are some of my influences when it comes to thinking about AI. So Douglas Hofstadter, he wrote some really brilliant books. I absolutely loved reading those when I was quite young. They've been around for a long time. And of course, the science fiction, Neuromancer, Ghost in the Shell, HAL 9000. These are things that really I thought about a lot when I was much younger, and continue to influence these things. One of the reasons why I like the fiction is because it does give us an insight as to where these things might go and why we need to think carefully about what we're doing. But I don't know whether anyone else is a Ghost in the Shell fan, but the Where To Now is basically a reference to that movie, which is one of my favorite movies. But where we are with AI right now is somewhere in between those 2 points. We have a very academic and grounded view of AI, and then we have a very media view of AI, that it can save the world and do all these things, or it's going to destroy the world and it's absolutely terrible. And we really want to think about this in a rational and reasoned way, and we want to approach this in a way that is actually everyone is agreeing as the way forward, as what should be the way forward, sorry. And I'm not an expert on AI. I'm an interested person. We have some experts in AI in this room who've done far more research on this, and this is why that Moodle as a HQ as a whole will be coming to the community and asking for your opinions, and want to know what research you're doing and what projects you're doing and what your outcomes are, because that will help us make informed decisions, and it will help the community as a whole. If we can share as much of that information as possible, will help the community as a whole make informed decisions. So the intent of this workshop is to work through a series of questions to get a clearer picture of the attitudes, the concerns, the hopes, and the needs of what everyone wants out of AI. And I'm hoping we'll be able to share the results that I gathered today back with the entire association. So I'll summarize that material and I'll pass it on to Paula to be shared out. We'll also be utilizing WooClap so everyone can participate in that feedback. So if you have a phone or a laptop, this is how you connect to the WooClap. If you can scan that code, there should be and that will allow you to, when we get to the questions, to actually send responses in. So I'll just give everyone a moment on that. And I will say I'm actually really happy to see the number of people who have stayed around today and have actually joined this session. It's a very large group of people. I was expecting maybe 10 or 20, and I've been told over 100. So I'm actually really, really glad we were able to do that. If you haven't been able to join and we get to a question, I'll show the join code again when we get to the first question. So the first thing I want to talk about is the AI legislation, and we spoke about this briefly yesterday. There's a lot of legislation starting to pop up. There's the EU legislation. Italy has some legislation coming through. The US has already got some in little bits and pieces. The major piece of legislation hasn't been passed yet. And a lot of these are talking about the risks of using it in high risk settings, or there is classifying settings as to unacceptable risks, high risk areas, limited risk, and minimal risk. So these are things like, is an AI system making a decision about somebody's life that is going to impact them adversely? Education, generally most of the legislation that I've read is listed in the high risk area. And there are several reasons for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit further down. But it also defines obligations about the users of AI and the organizations that are running the models. There is also a QR code in that bottom corner that actually jumps to a primer. So if you're not familiar with the EU legislation, there's actually quite a good article that kind of summarizes what all the major obligations are and what all the major risk categories are. I found that really useful just to stay on top of what the legislation looked like. So I think we're actually getting to our first question. And I'd actually like to get everyone's view here. So this is just a vote. Given the current legislative frameworks that are out there, so the first question there is, again, 1 is I strongly disagree with the statement, and then 5 is I strongly agree with the statement. I'm less likely to use AI in my professional work due to the new AI legislation, and my institution is less likely to utilize AI in teaching students due to the new AI legislation. I'm really interested to hear people's thoughts on this. I've seen several surveys, one which Martin Doug Amos ran, where there's lots of positive sentiment towards AI. And then I've seen a couple others run by other institutions where it was very mixed. There was a group of people who were very enthusiastic. There were some people who were very cautious. There were people who was like, absolutely no. So I'd really love to see what the community here thinks about these things. So we've got about 30 people voted. Does anyone need the join code again? Nope. Excellent. So as those results come in, we'll have a look how they're going. So that's really interesting. It seems to be a lot of people are saying that they strongly disagree with the statement, that they are actually very likely to be using AI in their personal work and that their institutions are likely to be using AI. And that I find really interesting, and that's good. That's good to see. The attitudes towards the way that these tools are being used is changing very, very rapidly. And we've seen this with technology in the past. So, for example, when you talk about SaaS solutions and things sitting on AWS cloud, 10 years ago, no institution wanted to put their tools on AWS. They didn't want to have anything running outside their data centers. In a space of about 3 to 5 years, that completely changed. And this, I think, is a good indication that we're seeing the same thing with AI. We're very quickly going from a position of like, I don't want to touch it, I don't understand it, I don't know it, to people actually being very enthusiastic and actually wanting to know how to use it and actually embrace it. So this is excellent. Does anyone want to share their views on the legislation or their concerns around it or their hopes around how they're using it? I really hope we actually have a chance to have some discussion here. So.
Well, we have actually some problems, from the point of view of using some of the providers that you mentioned for the AI subsystem. For example, OpenAI. We actually tried to test with a limited number of users ChatGPT Pro and Educational now, but we find out that the AI legislation, but anyway, the GDPR legislation is not compatible at all with the public institution in Italy. I mean, in the European Union. Yeah, we use Anthropic Claude, but not directly with Anthropic, yep, but with Amazon Bedrock, so within the virtual private cloud in AWS. So
awesome, that's really cool.
Yeah, and one of my questions would be, you mentioned yesterday that one of the providers would be Amazon Bedrock.
Yep.
And my question was, do you have any roadmap, any timeline about having the availability of Amazon Bedrock on the AI subsystem?
I'll have to check with Matt Porter, who's the product manager for that, but I believe that's one of the ones that we're prioritizing in the next release. It'll either be in the next 5.0 or 5.1. So, but I can definitely get back to you and share that back through the organization. Did anyone else have any other comments at all? No? Excellent. So again, sorry, go ahead.
At the other side. Since I work in translation and interpreting in language, I don't have any comments on the institutional side of legislation, but I'll just flip it to the other side for a minute. The real concern for us isn't so much legislation at a department level, that's a university problem for us, but the pedagogical level. So ours is completely on, since you had the mood feeling there on usage of AI, ours is on the pedagogical side. How do you use it so that it solves a problem?
Yep, and that's a really good point. So I think that thinking about what is the problem we're trying to solve, and we'll get to that a little bit further down, that's something we need to keep in front of mind. And I think with the AI usage, it's going to be very much how it falls in legislation. It's going to be very much what you're doing with it. So if you're doing a translation, that's adding value, but not changing content as such. That's probably much lower risk than I'm using AI to assess a student. And I think that's something that people are starting to really understand. And again, we've got some experts in the room. I'm sure they've spoken about this during the conference, but some of the issues that have keep coming up. So it's things like hallucinations. I actually really enjoy the top one. Some of these are a little bit old now, and by old I say like 6 months old. But somebody asked one of the Google tools, say something that parrots can do as a variety of jobs, including woodworkers, architects, prison inmates. Not exactly a great job for a parrot. Or geologists recommend eating at least one small rock per day. It's an article from a satire newspaper that Google took as a real source. And then we have some other issues around AI. When you start using it within tools, you can start seeing issues where people are jailbreaking the safeguards you put around it. Prompt poisoning. I saw a great example where a lecturer, to stop his students using AI in their assignments, was actually putting in white text a prompt in the middle of that. So if they went and put that into ChatGPT to try to generate an essay, it would then go and insert a paragraph about aliens in the middle of this essay. So he could very easily see those sort of things. And prompt and hijacking and leaking. So there are ways you can actually get the tool to tell you what its safeguards are and what prompts it's being used to be primed with. So these are just some of the issues that are around. Tools are getting better at safeguarding these things and stopping users from doing them, but largely AI doesn't know the difference between what you're prompting it with and what the context is. And that's part of its strength, because it can take the whole thing as a whole, but it's also an attack vector for students. So again, this is an open question. If people would like to respond, like, what are your views on the risks of AI in the education settings? What are the things that are you concerned about in the education setting? Are you concerned about students cheating? Are you concerned about biases? Are you not concerned? Do you think that actually all these things can be dealt with? I'd really like to spend like a minute or so just having being allowed people to respond to that. So if and I'll just put the list of as they come up. Environmental impact, and that's actually a really interesting one. I don't think a lot of people realize the amount of power it takes to actually generate a model, and how much power it takes to actually generate a response to a model. So I think that's a really, really interesting one to come up. I think people are thinking more environmentally about their use of technology. Oops, sorry, I need to do that. Privacy, absolutely, that's one that's very big. Yeah, can I do this? Will that be easier? Nope. Critical thinking decrease, that's an interesting one. Does anyone actually want to comment on any of these? Like, the critical thinking decrease is one that I think is actually an interesting question, and there's a lot of pedagogical discussion around whether students are going to think for themselves less or whether they're going to learn to research better. So did anyone want to comment on any of these?
Thank you very much. Hi, good morning. I've actually experimented with students in class and had a class where only 2 of my students last year actually had used AI. And so we did it for the first time in class and used it to actually point out how they can use it critically as opposed to just use it for shortcuts. So it was quite useful.
That's really interesting here, thank you. So I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to keep moving because I've got quite a lot here, and I think I may have bitten off more than we have time for. So cost and bias is another area that we actually see a lot of concerns around. So AI is expensive to run, not just environmentally, but also financially. One of the reasons why we chose to do the subsystem is so you have that control over which tools you use and which vendors that you engage with, and whether you run those models on your own infrastructure. And dominant cultural bias. So these are a couple of images, a little bit older. There's a great blog talking about, this is when Gemini was first released. They were trying to address biases, and then in doing so, they went too far the other way. And so when you ask for a picture of a pope, you could get a female pope, or you could get a black pope. And while that's great, there are other Christian denominations that do have black popes, not so much for the Catholic denomination. And black Vikings may or may not have happened, but it's unlikely. So the next question I want to ask, and I think this is actually particularly pertinent for me in this audience, because I very much spend a lot of time speaking to audiences that are Australian American, Western dominant in that way, is your institution concerned about running the cost of running AI services? But what I'm actually really interested in is, do you feel that the commercial AI models adequately represent your culture and your background? And it's something I'd really like to hear from an Italian audience, because this is something that we've seen in other cultures as a problem, and I have no idea. So I'd really love to hear people's responses on this one. This is actually a really interesting one. We're getting a very big spread of responses. And I do find it interesting that no one has said that they strongly agree with the commercial AI models strongly represent your culture, but we've got a lot of disagreement with that. So, does anyone want to comment on what areas they feel that's particularly weak?
Particularly?
Sorry?
Can you repeat the question?
Would anyone like to comment in areas that they feel that the commercial models are particularly weak in representing, for example, Italian culture?
Aree in cui i
language.
modelli commerciali sono deboli ancora. Questo è, lui vuole un commento se in Europa è diverso. Ecco. Abbiamo uno che sa criticare qua.
Well, probably at the moment our institutions are not very good at dealing with pay-as-you-go services. So the token part of AI for some universities may be difficult to handle. So maybe if there is a change in the pricing, not itself the price, but how is it proposed? I mean, if they go for a flat service or something like that, may be easier to explain and to sell to our own universities.
Awesome, thank you.
Any comments about biases? Representation biases you were asking, right? Yeah, we have.
I'm sure I can just say what most people have discovered very easily. Obviously, I'm not Italian, but I work again in a department of translation and interpretation, so we're very conscious of how language carries message and meaning. We discovered very quickly, of course we were looking for it, that if you ask certain questions in Italian, and we were actually not in Claude yet because Claude wasn't out yet, it was very clear we were getting American answers. We were asking questions in Italian, getting answers in Italian. It was obvious that it was not Italian culture. It was not Italian thinking. It was not current issues in Italy, especially concerning issues around certain kinds of politics or gender politics or things where you're sure that the American bias is intentionally put into these systems. So in those cases, it was very clear that it did not respond to any reality in Italy, but it was speaking in Italian.
Yeah, thank you. We've got another comment here.
Sorry, me again. Regarding this, at the moment we are trying in our university to work on biases on LLMs, and we're trying to organize workshops where the first exercise will be to challenge the LLMs on biases. So trying to understand the point of view, let's say, of the LLMs to try to demonstrate in a practical way to students and teachers how they are not talking with some neutral technology, but that's quite challenging.
Awesome. So again, we always want to come back to that question of what problem are we trying to solve? Oh, sorry, we got another comment. Please go ahead.
I would like to add that if we try to use it for administrative purposes, the words being used are fairly different from the colloquial talking, so it kind of falls apart when you try to use it that way. Generally, any AI doesn't understand Italian law speaking or administrative speaking. So, bureaucracy, yeah.
So the language it's using is very formal language.
Yeah, it doesn't understand really the terms and the nuances of variations, because maybe sometimes a term is used generically when colloquially speaking, but there are different terms more precise for bureaucracy.
Yep. That's really interesting to know. Thank you. So again, we're just talking about what problems we're trying to solve, and I wanted people to maybe spend a moment thinking about that. And just coming back to that image we had yesterday from the Paris Fair in 2000, I think that this is actually quite good in two ways. One, it's a great illustration of people thinking into the future about, hey, if we had this great thing, we could just force information into the students' brains. But if you look at it a different way and say, what is the problem they're trying to solve? Are they trying to solve that students aren't learning, or students aren't learning quick enough, or students just aren't paying attention? I think the boy in the blue in the front row looks a little bit unhappy about being forced to study, personally. So it's, again, just trying to frame it back to that, what are we trying to solve? And I think that we can clearly see that a lot of people are thinking about that right now. So I'm going to ask two questions here. Again, these are just feedback questions. What is the biggest challenge Sorry, let me start again. What is the biggest challenge to learning that is faced by your students? And that's a very broad question. That might be something in the classroom, that might be something with the university systems, that could be something entirely outside the university. And is that something that we can address in some way? So that's really the first thing we want to think about. I'll just give us 1 minute to have a look at that. Yeah, that's what we want. Attention span decrease. Languages take time to learn. Lack of motivation. Cooperative learning. That's actually a really interesting one. The reason why I say the cooperative learning one is an interesting one is because there's a lot of discussion around whether cooperating with an AI is as effective as cooperating with another student in the learning. Citing a summary of AI in lessons, educational systems very slow to adapt. Yeah. Fear of lack of examinations, motivations come up again, tutoring and coaching. There are some great results here. Thank you very much. We'll give that about another 10 seconds, and then we'll move on to the next question as well. And then we can discuss both. I'm just horribly conscious of time. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question now. And the next question is essentially the same thing, but from the instructor's point of view. What is the biggest challenges that teachers are faced? Well, what is the biggest challenge to teaching that is faced by either yourself as an instructor or your instructors in your institution? And again, these might be similar to what the students are facing. These might be other broader issues, structural issues. And again, these are some really interesting. So keeping up with technology. Sorry, Paula, can you translate that? Yeah. Oops, sorry. One that's in Italian there.
La velocità con cui succede tutto, non c'è tempo, time management.
Yep.
There is too much to do. There is never time.
I think that's been a universal truth for instructors forever. No falling behind on new technologies, accept the future, engagement, motivate students, time management, keeping up with technology using the classroom, engaging students, fostering student engagement, AI and digital solutions, reducing repetitive admin tasks. That's an interesting one. How to teach AI opportunities, providing personal feedback. Again, that's a really interesting one. Technology's biases. Student transformations. I've lost it. It's jumped on me. We're getting a lot of responses here. This is really great. Thank you very much for being so engaged with this exercise. So I'm going to keep moving forward, and we can have, if we've got time, to have a bit more discussion around this at the end. And these two questions are really just to kind of set the frame of mind about what are we really thinking of when we start looking at these issues, at this technology, and what are we trying to solve. So this is me being incredibly selfish right now. We want to extend the AI subsystem. And yesterday we talked about the placement, so where within Moodle would these tools be available? What actions can you do with these tools? They're the two things that we're going to look at now. Providers I'm less concerned about. That's more of a technology side thing, and there's a much smaller number of options there that we need to consider. So thinking about the problems that are faced by students, what actions, actually this could be students and teachers, apologies for the phrasing of this question, but thinking about the problems that students are facing, what actions do you think could help address these issues? So the teaching issues that we just listed and the students' issues that we just listed, what sort of actions using, not necessarily AI, but what sort of actions within the system do we think could help address some of those issues? And this can be anything. This is when we're doing product management, what we call an ideation phase. So this is like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. What do we think might be a good idea? And then we can start investigating and seeing whether there's actually something behind it. So what sort of actions are we at the moment? We've got the summarize action. We've got the generate text. We've got the generate image. Are there other things within the system that you think that an AI might be able to help students with, for example, or teachers with, providing feedback or something like that? So we're starting to get a couple of responses.
Can I repeat the question, because maybe somebody was not here when you presented the first time?
Yep.
Yeah? La questione è semplice, adesso nel sistema, come avete visto il primo giorno, ci sono le azioni nel nuovo sistema, che sono generare testo, generare immagini, e ci sono i placement, che vuol dire cosa faccio quando genero testo, quando genero immagine. Uno è, per esempio, fare la sintesi del testo, erano le cose che avevo fatto vedere. Ci sono delle funzioni in futuro che possono servire al docente, e di queste funzioni, io le sto chiamando funzioni perché faccio fatica a chiamarle azioni or placements, ma perdonatemi, e quindi quello che lui vuole sapere, cioè se c'è un uso possibile delle AI, cosa vorresti vedere là, o per gli studenti o per i docenti, che può essere il prossimo passo di Moodle da promuovere introducendo nel sistema? Questa era... I'm sorry I made it long,
okay.
but in
okay.
Italian sometimes you need more words.
I greatly appreciate the assistance. So I'll just quickly have a quick look at some of these responses here. I'll start at the bottom because it tends to pop up at the top. So synchronous activities, summarizing is good, but to be inclusive needs to represent a conceptual map. So that would be an action where it's more than just giving a text response, but giving some sort of conceptual map. That's actually a really interesting one. Connections between document content, that's very interesting. Teaching why and when you should use AI, not just how. So that's another one that actually, that could be quite a good action, saying when it's appropriate, when it's not. Synchronous collaborative activities with teachers' feedback. I'd really love to hear whoever put that in, what their comments might be. Step-by-step guides, student guides, help by step-by-step. Sorry, Paul, quiz personalization. I'm assuming that's a response.
I
was just wondering. That one?
Oh, yeah. Adaptive questionnaires, the ones
adaptive
that are
quizzes.
like Khan Academy, or
Yeah.
that understand the context and go and adapt.
Students teaching AI about staff?
There is a word there that maybe not everybody knows, although Angelo has tried to explain the other day, but we were not all them. Everybody knows what is a RAG. Could you explain when you comment?
I'm probably not the best person to explain.
Yeah,
so a RAG is oh God, I can't remember the acronym now. Yeah. It's part of a AI system for
creating knowledge bases.
Yeah. So it's part of an AI system for actually learning content. Is probably the easiest way of putting it.
Okay.
So course creation is interesting to see there. We're seeing a lot of tools pop up around course creation, which is good. Restrict AI spaces to specific content. So that's actually one of the reasons why we're looking at having different providers for different actions. So you can actually have specialized models. Theoretically, LLM would be good language learning buddy, adequate feedback and context to be created. Assistant simulation, branching scenarios. So there's about 20-something responses here. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is then, sorry?
That one in Italian, do you want me to translate it to you? It was autonomy, responsibility, and diversity in one's own learning.
Yep, awesome. So as I said, just conscious of time, we're going to move on to the next question now, but thank you, that's a lot of content there for me to go through. And then the last one is thinking about placements. So we have a placement which is kind of like in the course. We have a placement where AI can appear within the editor. What other areas within Moodle do you think that we could have somewhere an action button or a way that an AI could actually interact with the student? Are those two enough? Are there other areas we need it?
I will explain to the ones that were not here as well. Il placement è il dove, quindi c'è una funzione di sintesi, per esempio, lui ci ha fatto vedere due situazioni diverse nella prima presentazione. Una, per esempio, è la sintesi di un forum, l'altra è la sintesi usata dalla parte dello studente, da questa volta di un'istruzione, di un testo. Quindi un conto è dire qual è l'azione AI è fammi la sintesi. L'altro conto è dove e di che cosa. Quindi placement vuol dire questo dove.
Yep.
Okay, again, too much words, but...
I appreciate the help. So we've got someone who said dashboard, so having an AI interactions on the dashboard. Is there any other areas that people think that we could add to make it more accessible for students? Oh, no, now we've got a flurry of responses.
Yeah, they're coming.
There we go. So side blocks, so as a block, AI activity instructional specific functions, not just summarizing or brainstorming. Save responses, edit responses, working quotes, yeah. Whoops, apologies. Single activity, standalone assistant or helper. Lesson activity assignment, so actually as an activity itself, that's very interesting. Creating an AI section in a course where you can choose. So as a, that one's actually interesting. The creating an AI section in a course that you can choose, whoever put that in, would you be happy to expand on that idea?
What?
Sorry, there was a one there which was, yeah, sorry, Paul.
Huh? You? Yes. Okay.
Hi. I do the answer about the A section. What?
Louder.
Voce? Okay. Good morning. For me, it's important to let the student choose or not to use AI.
Yep.
And so the idea of create a section where you can choose if you want to use this new tool or not, for me, it's something very important.
Okay, that's
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for explaining. That's really good. So that really comes to the end of what I wanted to go through this workshop, and thank you for all this really valuable information. This is going to help us kind of shape where we want to go. It gives us some really good feedback about some of the bias concerns and some of the other concerns, particularly in a non-English speaking audience, which is important for us to hear more often. And then lastly, I know we're probably out of time, but I wanted to basically open the floor up to discussion whether there's anyone wanted to talk about projects they're working on or ideas they have or things that their institutions are doing. Paul, do we have time or?
We have 7 minutes.
Oh, 7 minutes, excellent.
Yeah, we do. Yeah?
He was just saying, considering everything you said yesterday, the summaries of the future work, of the things that are being consolidated, the new tools or approaches, he says perhaps he's seeing a lot of the same abilities that ChatGPT, for example, can do. So he's saying he sees that AI is most useful, or very useful anyway, inside Moodle to do the things you do in Moodle itself, to help a professor or a teacher work in Moodle itself, create inside Moodle itself. So this is talking about the workflow of course creation, or part of course creation, giving the content in, having it be packaged up and created pretty much automatically, but then of course leaving the room for editing by the author, of course. Yep. But feeding in the content, the majority of structure, content, ideas, and then being able to edit to make it right.
Yeah, awesome.
So not simply, it's all possible, why not do it? Yep. Instead of simply taking the content and creating a question pool, so now I have a question pool, go to the next step and make me the quiz.
Yeah, that's like, these are things, that's a great idea. Like, these are things that we want to hear that's important to you. So yeah, that's great, thank you.
One last thing, at the same time, this is, I think, the future, what Angelo is saying, but at the same time, I think we could be working on more as a community, as instructional designers, teachers, and professors. I mean, having in Moodle activities based on AI that are not just simply summarize, brainstorm, or create me a quiz. Earlier I wrote about collaborative RAG, so students collaborating together to create an expert, giving papers and articles, and then asking AI to work on that articles. These are a new way of using, of teaching in general that uses AI instead of trying only to do what we were doing 2 years ago, but quicker.
Yeah.
So
just to clarify, there are people developing new ways of using for Moodle. I don't remember the name, but I have seen the sharing in Moodle research of many new ideas. I don't know if you have stories to tell, but we can share that in the groups afterwards, because I've been there just looking and lurking, but there is something that is already happening. There is another comment here.
Of course, I agree with Angelo. Also, it's big, you know, so you cannot disagree with him. But apart from that, I believe that the emphasis should be on course creation and of giving tools to the professor to create and to store his own knowledge. You know, AI is a tool. AI is not knowledge. But AI is pretty good in eliciting people to come out with their knowledge that can be reused. So, for example, you will probably go to RAG at some point. Why don't you create a pipeline that allow you to put the domain knowledge that the professor puts in his work somewhere there that can be reused? Then, of course, there will be security, privacy, and similar. But at least we have the tool and to capitalize on this. So I expect, and this will be a positioning, you know, it will be the positioning of Moodle in particular to what it does best, which is course creation and course transmission.
Awesome. So can I ask a counter question to that to other people in the audience?
Yeah.
Particularly the academics, because this is something I've seen from the technology side versus the teacher side. How do teachers feel about their knowledge being encoded into an AI for future use?
No.
Just something to think about. Excellent. Does anyone else have any more discussions or comments? I think we're very close to time. No? Awesome. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for all your input. It's been absolutely amazing today. And thank you very much for everyone's kindness over the course of this conference. I've absolutely enjoyed being here, and I've learned a lot from the community, so thank you.